Welcome to Ace's Space on Radio Arder. I'm joined by Jamie Clark.
Hola.
Hola. So today we're going to be talking about how media and creativity affects sort of mental health in general, the pros and the cons, the good and the bad. So we're going to look at the positive side first before we get into the nitty-gritty. So I'd say creatively I'm a musician and a writer as well as a radio DJ, but on my personal level that's what I do.
Sell yourself.
Yeah.
Go on.
Ace and Roze, link me up on all my socials. But I use that as my personal means of channeling just all my messed up mental health issues. So I target anxiety, depression, try and focus a lot on mental health and politics in a lot of my music and my writing. But you're more of a startup writer. You've sort of found yourself creatively quite recently.
Yeah, I'm just getting into it, to be fair.
Yeah.
It's quite cool.
How's it helped your mental health?
Really well. It's taken such a load off my mind, I guess. Yeah, I wrote a poem, planned a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going well.
Would you like to read out your poem?
Do you know what? Oh, I will.
We'll give a little bit of a backstory first, because episode-wise, orders for Jamie's backstory. He's been talking about mental health and homelessness. So this is a poem sort of covering the
level of influence people can have. That is the deeper message, I guess. Influence. It's called The Road to Being Whole. It's quite cheesy, I know.
I love it.
So, lost in a world of dreams, lost in the minds of others, losing the memories, losing the mind. Everyone becomes no one, at least once in their lives.
I love that. It's simple but effective.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And I do feel like poetry and writing's been a very good outlet for you. And
yeah, and I mean, I'd recommend it to anybody. Writing first and foremost. Just put all of your emotion into anything.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be good. You're great. But I mean, just even if you're not a writer or a creative, writing down whatever's in your head, it stops it building up.
Yeah, it stops you thinking about it, so you can screw up that piece of paper, throw it in a bin, and be done with it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. It's cool.
Yeah, it's like making your thoughts tangible.
Yes, and then destroying those thoughts. It's like putting them in a box at the back of your mind.
Which isn't healthy.
Yes, that's not healthy. Don't do that. No. I would not recommend to do that.
No, that becomes a volcanic situation. Speaking of which, while music and art and literature and all of this stuff can be a positive influence, obviously it can be used negatively as well. In terms of things like, now we're going to get a bit dark for this one. So
dark.
Yeah, looking at things like the Jamie Bulger killings, and I can't remember what it was, the one that everyone was saying Marilyn Manson influence, but basically people always say that rock music, heavy metal, punk, all of that stuff has always been sort of demonized by mainstream culture, saying it's to blame for things like mass shootings, and
when in reality it's just the artist writing their emotion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Marilyn Manson, he's a dark character. His name is based off of of a dark character, Charles Manson. But it's his way of translating his own personal struggles and mental health and that through his music, and it's about how you interpret it. So it doesn't develop dark thoughts in a person's head. If dark thoughts are there, they're already there. So
it falls then down to how the child has been brought up.
Yeah.
And how they see the world, I guess.
No, I completely agree. So would you say that, like, I don't know, with America right now, I think obviously
with El Paso and the latest shooting,
I was
Donald Trump has kind of push that towards gaming.
Yeah, he's banned video games or violent video games from Target. However, like as in like all the shops in America now removing these so-called video games like Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, all of this stuff, and yet guns are still available to buy in Walmart.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
So,
stop the games, but we shall not stop the guns.
But guns are half price, man. On sale.
What can you do, eh?
Well, I mean, I don't know what it's going to take at this point, because you get all these musicians like the 1975. I think what they're doing right now is absolutely fantastic. They've got Greta Thunberg as well, who is appearing on one of their tracks, which is to sort of protest climate change and everything. But
so they're making their album about real world issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
so it's a lot heavier, actually. I think it's fantastic that they've sort of diverted. But that's what music is doing right now. It's progressing, because I feel like punk is always going to be there. Like back, you know, in the days of slavery, singing blues and gospel songs, you know, and that was their form of protest to get them through that. And then you've got the 80s, you've got the punk scene and the movement coming up when politically things needed to change. And then it seemed to die off, but that's only because it wasn't really needed until now, when you see all of these sort of seemingly soft bands and pop bands and everything going punk because everyone's angry about what's happening. So you've got the parents of all these kids that they'd rather blame the music than take responsibility for their
own bad parenting.
Yeah. But it's a generational thing. I mean, like, obviously with your upbringing, I feel like there wasn't much of a creative influence growing up, other than...
Not necessarily, but creativity was there. Creativity is in everyone. It just has to be realised.
That's what, yeah.
You just got to find it within yourself, I guess. But
so
no, it's crazy to think that a form of art in gaming is being blamed. It seems to me they're just trying to blame the creative people for their own mistakes.
Yeah, and I think it's because they know that essentially creative people will make or have the ability to make the most change in taking down all these other people, because you see people blaming like celebrities for being bad influences. And like I said, all the mass shootings and all these kids killing each other, they're blaming all of this multimedia content. But then you have celebrities like Ashton Kutcher, who's taking down paedophile rings and like given up his celebrity status to do that. And you've got...
What a guy, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't get enough credit at all.
Not at all, no.
And then you have Akon, who like in a year provided light for Africa. And it makes you wonder where all of like the money is going, other than, you know, obviously into the pockets of the
big
governments.
Corporate bosses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's the real issue. It's it's a generational thing where they know that they know that the new generation is essentially going to dethrone them.
Well, that's how it's always been, hasn't it? Like, you look back to previous generations, especially within England, you know, the correct wording has escaped me, but I'm going to go for it anyway.
Okay.
For example, a mixed race couple.
Yeah.
You know, if, say, the girl, white girl, went to the parents and said, I've got a child, you know, back in those days, they were very against it. And it links back to this one. You know, we talk about, in our generation, mental health and the struggles with that. And our parents are very against it because it's new. And it's just going to keep going on and on and on and on. There will always be this battle because there are always going to be new things that come about.
Yeah.
So it's about how we come together as a collective to move forward.
And especially, like, I mean, creatives always find each other, I feel, eventually. And it's sort of a community, it's a family that creates itself. But I think it's finding the right influences, because when you don't have that growing up, like if you're surrounded by potentially dangerous stuff, it's easy to blame, you know, it's easy for parents to be like, oh, he plays too many video games and all of this stuff. But then when you have things like these shootings, you have things like this kid on Facebook that I saw, I was just watching the video, where a burglar had come into his house and had woken the kid up. He'd been taught how to use his dad's gun. He knew where it was and all of this. And he was just being interviewed on live television, talking about how he murdered this burglar. And this kid's like, what, 8 or 9, 10 or something?
Bloody
and
hell.
he's going into great detail about how he shot him in the leg and how this guy was screaming. And so he kept shooting him in the chest and stood over him and then shot his jaw off and then shot him in the back. And I was like, and these radio presenters... I was like, America, right? These radio presenters were praising him and saying to his dad, oh, you must be so proud of him. And they were saying, oh, how you're a hero. And this kid was just talking about how much he enjoyed watching the guy bleed out and like all of this stuff. And I was just thinking, I was like, this is the reason why shootings are happening. Is it's not because of the media, because then straight after this segment was the segment of Trump talking about how, it's not about gun control, it's about external elements like video games and music. And then you see something like this where they're glorifying potential and breeding potential psychopaths. This kid is going to shoot up a school, like
at least at some point,
and then they're going to praise him for it, and he probably won't even get any time, and then they're going to wonder why it happened.
The kid is 8 years old, did you say? About
like 8, 9, 10, something like that. Yeah, and he looked like a tiny Jimmy Carr. That's the best way I can describe him. But he had a real serial killer vibe to him, like a full on, like, you know how sociopaths and psychopaths have that sort of dead,
cold,
emotionless kind of remorseless vibe. This kid had it.
Like this.
And
this.
Yeah, that's perfect. The eyes. It's all in the eyes. Beautiful. That's a mugshot right there. But this is the age that it's most important to influence kids in all of the right things. And like I said, growing up, I was very, very lucky that I had parents who like encouraged me to be as creative as I wanted to and be anything that I want. And so now I've sort of learned how to channel sort of any emotions or negativity or anything that I'm feeling into a song or a poem or like a story, anything, art, whatever it is. But if I didn't have that, I feel like I'd be a completely different person, probably a lot worse than I am, because it's made me a better person. Weirdly, Doctor Who has been my moral compass growing up.
Especially with David Tennant, you've got to agree. Like David Tennant and Matt Smith, I'm still torn between who's my favourite.
Well, I think out of the two, David Tennant has got to be my favourite, but I've been watching it since the first Doctor in the 50s, not because I'm old and actually a time traveller and immortal, but because my mother got me the box set, and I can guarantee the black and white version is a lot creepier. But
yeah, I bet. I've seen the Cybermen. They just look weird.
It's stuff like that, though, because they used to say that Doctor Who was really dark and occultic and a bad influence on children because it was scary and to do with aliens and all of this stuff. But it was actually created as a history show when it was first made, before it even had aliens introduced. It was created as time travel, as a fun way to teach kids history. And I do feel like they're doing that more now in terms of episodes like Van Gogh and Rosa Parks and all of this stuff. But that's what I'm talking about in terms of the line where you have, it's playing the blame game essentially, because you can blame anything for having a negative impact on a person's life.
Absolutely anything.
Anything.
Like a stranger walking by you in the street looks at you funny.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Anything can flip a switch that you didn't know was there.
But
it's crazy stuff.
It's weird how much a change in perspective, though, like can alter everything. Because music for me did that, because I started treating people differently when I looked introspectively at myself and my own attitudes. But little kids are influenced very heavily by anything because their brains are still developing.
They're still going through the nurturing period of childhood, which is incredibly important to make sure the child has the correct coping mechanisms in place to deal with stress and so on and so forth, which can lead to an emotional instability within the mind.
Exactly.
But again, mental health, it's all about how the single person responds to the environment and to their traumas. A child could go through life and live the worst, domestic violence, seen some crazy stuff, be absolutely fine. And
or
another
think
kid,
they're fine because they don't really understand what they're seeing until they get older and they realise that trauma has been,
Yeah. And then all those underlying issues could come to the front. And then that's when you start to develop the psychopathic tendencies. Who knows? The mind it's a wonderful thing, but still so much of it is untouched.
I think creators also will have that. I think the more creative you are, the easier it is to create a darkness in yourself, because the brain has the capability of turning it against you. Because if it can create something incredible like music and art and literature, think of how it can affect the mind. So when you have artists like Marilyn Manson, you have artists like Ozzy Osbourne, like all of these artists who have the ability to create such dark music but be such a creative person, you've got to wonder what their mental health is like. And I don't feel like blaming the art itself is ever going to really establish a solution for actually fixing any of what's happening in terms of violence and knife crime and homelessness, mental health. All of this stuff has to be essentially locked down at the root cause.
See, this is where knowledge comes into play. If it was just mandatory to be taught in schools very early on, the basics of life, how to deal with stress and all of that sort of stuff, it would in effect take a load off the parents' minds if they've got a lot of work to do. So maybe in terms of the future, moving forward, dealing with mental health, having this in schools could have a massive impact.
Yeah. For a final thought, do you have any quotes in your little list of quotes?
My book of quotes.
Your book of quotes. I love this. I love how it's what creatives do. We write down little things, jot down nice influential. It's like that love, live, laugh thing. I hate it. I deeply hate it, but I do like stuff like that. I feel like having quotes, tattoos, something on your wall. It's good to have a motto or a mantra.
This one is by a famous French writer, Richard Roze. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Rohr. It is to do with mental health again, or my interpretation of it was, for example, you could have a really bad habits, sleeping patterns, eating patterns, and whatnot. This quote says, "We do not think ourselves into new ways of thinking. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking." My interpretation, you have to take action to change the way your mind is thinking.
Yeah.
So maintaining a positive sleeping pattern, getting to sleep at, say, 10 o'clock in the evening,
having a
waking up at 5
routine,
o'clock,
eating right, yeah.
Regular routine, and one that suits to you personally, I guess. But yeah, thinking about change is not going to do anything. You have to take action, as I said.
I love that. Thank you again for joining me on this episode. You've been listening to Ace of Space on Radio Arder. Peace out.